big deal. Um, it's a really big deal, and it's going to impact a lot of people's lives. Basically, they were going to raise prices on the system and cut service. This is in the state of Pennsylvania. It was just announced by conservative Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro, right? And so, what we're here to talk about today is our Everyday Counts campaign. That's basically um, about how can we do everything possible on climate um, before the end of the year, and then furthermore, how can we like specifically get into tactics that are going to impact people's lives? So we're going to be talking about, we have our amazing friend Laura Chu Weens here from Pittsburgh's Republic Transit to talk about how they secured this win and their amazing transit organizing in Pennsylvania. We have Corrigan from Transportation for America, our esteemed colleague who has been doing amazing research on the climate impacts of the bipartisan infrastructure law and why this is so important. And folks from the Green New Deal Network team and Everyday Counts campaign are going to walk through what the campaign is about, what we're doing. And then, we're going to get to the point of action where we're going to invite people to join us in pushing the Department of Transportation. Um, we will get into all of that right now. If you are new to this campaign, welcome. We're so happy you're here. If you're new to flex funding, that's okay. It doesn't really make that much sense, which is why we're having a training on it instead of asking people to like know what we're talking about. Um, and congrats to everyone who worked on this campaign. A lot of us have been working on trying to get states to flex funds for about a year. I know organizers and unions in Pennsylvania have been really busting their asses every single day, trying to make this a reality. So it's a moment to celebrate before we go on to the next fight tomorrow and try and keep securing climate wins in a difficult moment in history. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Nassim Ashford, who's going to talk a little bit about an overview of the Everyday Counts campaign and the rally that kicked it off on Sunday.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nassim Ashford. Um, as Saul already stated, the Everyday Counts campaign was started in the sense of thinking that Biden still is the president right now, and there's a lot of different things that he can do before Trump gets in office. And so we started this campaign uh, very much so with that in mind. And so last Sunday, we had a big demonstration in front of the EPA building in DC, where we had speakers coming out from different sides of the climate movement to talk about issues that Biden could potentially address before leaving his office during the lame duck period. And during this time, after the event, the demonstration, we are now focusing on building and training different members like yourselves and others who are interested in organizing to put these demands up to Biden and get some things done. Some of our demands include pushing out additional money and obligating funds from the IRA, protecting public lands and designating certain monuments, as well as increasing Native American management and rights. As we also are looking to stop fossil fuel projects and confirm additional judges and pardon political prisoners in the climate movement as well. And so this campaign will be going up until the day that Trump gets inaugurated. And there's a lot of stuff that we hope to accomplish before then. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Nassim. We're so excited. A lot of folks here were part of the rally on Sunday. All right, let's go to the next slide here. And I'll pass it to Giancarlo to walk through flex funding.
Thanks, all. So before we talk about flex funding, this might be a bit of a review, but we thought it would be useful to have a quick overview of how we fund transportation generally in the United States. And spoiler alert, it is through laws like the IIJA, or Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is also called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Um, despite the fact that we talk negatively about things like 5-year plans in the United States, that is effectively what laws like the bipartisan infrastructure law are. They are instructions to the federal government um, and an authorization for the US Department of Transportation for how they can spend money over the next few or several years, depending on the specifics of the bill. In those instructions, state are or in those instructions are how to disperse money to states and local governments. Um, Many states receive, or all states receive, what are called formula funds for highways through a set of several different programs, and actually dozens of different programs. We call these formula funds because they have formulas within them that determine how much each different state gets for each bucket of funding. And each bucket of funding or each program has different instructions for how states can use that money on different transportation projects. Some of these programs have a lot more funding in them than others. In particular, there is a set of core highway programs that have the most money of almost all the transportation programs and almost all of the programs in the bipartisan infrastructure law in general. There are two in particular that I'll talk about later that actually have about a third of all the money that was spent on transportation in the IIJA just within those two buckets. And spoiler alert, those are highway programs. So now let's talk about the topic of the day, flex funding. Since 2012, the laws that determine how states and the federal government can spend transportation funds have allowed for states to what we call flex funds between a specific set of those core highway programs that I mentioned earlier. Under IIJA, there are 8 of these programs that can have funds transferred between them. There is the National Highway Performance Program, or NHPP, the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, or STBG, the Highway Safety and Improvement Program, or HSIP, the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program, or CMAQ, the National Highway Freight Program, or NHFP, the Metropolitan Planning Program, which is alone in this list of programs and not having an acronym, and feels sad because of that, the Carbon Reduction Program, or CRP, and the Protect Program, which I don't have the name for in front of me, but it's all about promoting resilience, and they really wanted to have a fun acronym for that one, so they added on a bunch of words that they didn't actually need. Um, so all 8 of these programs are in a special category where states and metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs, if they choose, can move 50% of the funds from one of these programs into another one of these programs. Um, And so the important thing to know about flex funding in particular is that it was created to give flexibility to states. So, if you are, for example, Rhode Island, and you're really worried about the effects of climate change on infrastructure in your low-lying coastal areas, you could take money from the National Highway Performance Program, which had over $100 billion for the entire nation, and you could move it into your Protect program in order to spend money on improving the resiliency of your infrastructure in your low-lying coastal areas. If you are, for example, Michigan, and you have a lot of roads on the national highway system that need some damn fixing, to quote a particular governor from Michigan, you could move funds from your Surface Transportation Block Grant Program into your National Highway Performance Program and have more money to spend easily on the national highway system. And this is where the real potential of flex funding also comes in. Because funds from many of these programs can be spent on transit. This is a graph that was produced by an organization called Transit Center, which we here at GNDN work with all the time and which supports the transit advocacy across the country in a number of different ways. Um, and it shows how much of the total spending in the bipartisan infrastructure law is technically highway spending, but could be spent on transit. Because if you have money in your National Highway Performance Program, you can spend that on transit that is near a highway corridor. If you have money in your Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, you can spend that on any transit capital project that you want. If you have money in your Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, you can spend that money on some transit uses, including for some communities on operating support for transit. If you have money in your carbon reduction program, you can spend some of those funds on transit projects with some specific limitations. And so, a lot of the time, when we talk about flexing, the 50% number gets talked about in terms of the ability to use those funds on transit. That's really not the case, and I'll get into that later. But the point is that a lot of these programs that we think of as highway programs could be spent on transit. And there are just two steps to actually be able to spend those highway funds on transit. First of all, those transit projects need to be in your plans for how you're going to spend money. At the Metropolitan Planning Organization level, this is called a Transportation Improvement Plan or Program, or TIP. And at the state level, all you do is add a nice little S to that TIP and you have a STIP. So the first step is to have these transit projects in those plans. And then once you get that funding from the Federal Highway Administration or the FHWA, all you need to do is send in a little form that says, hey, we have this money under the, and you insert the name of your program here, but for this example, I'm going to use the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. We have this money under STBG that we would like to spend on a transit project. And because there's a segment of the government that works specifically for transit projects, we would like to transfer the authority over this funding to the Federal Transit Administration, or FTA. And this is how governors across the country could, like in a couple of months, unlock billions of dollars in transit funding that currently gets thought of as solely highway funding. And this is not just something that happened in Pennsylvania today. This is something that has happened in Pennsylvania in the past. This is something that has been happening in states across the country for years. The only thing is that for years, the scale of use for these funds has been much lower than what they actually can be. Because for years, it's been thought of as a stopgap and a way to do things like save a system like SEPTA, or help out on one smaller project, or makes a wide range of even smaller improvements to a system, as opposed to big, bold thinking along the lines of, we need to build a new BRT line or a system of BRT lines across our state. Let's use some of those flexible highway funds to build those transit projects. We need to build a new metro line, looking at you, LA, and New York City. Let's use some of those highway funds so that way we don't need to rely on the very difficult to predict and politically charged FTA discretionary grant process. So now, having talked about how flex funding works, and seeing some of the, thank you, Corrigan, for spelling out some of those projects. And I'll try to answer some of these questions in the chat. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to two people who are on the call doing really great work. First up, from the great state of Pennsylvania, Laura Chu-Wiens.
I don't know if we can really claim to be from a great state anymore, but Thanks for having me. It's a very exciting day for us. I'm Laura Chu Weens. I'm the executive director of Pittsburghers for Public Transit, but we're also one of the founding organizations of Transit for All PA, which is a statewide coalition of transit riders and workers organizing for expanded funding, expanded service for all the communities across the Commonwealth. And so I actually am approaching this from maybe the opposite perspective as Giancarlo. So let me just say, first of all, I am not a budget analyst. I don't feel like I have a lot of clarity about all the technical aspects about highway flex funding. It is something that we have been brought into the conversation around over the past year, and have sort of had this kind of longer term vision, nebulous vision of creating some structural changes around the allocation of highway dollars versus transit dollars. And I will say that as a transit advocate in a community among many communities that have really seen major service cuts over the last several years of the pandemic and over the last 20 years, it's harder to think about, harder to galvanize, frankly, members of the community to fight for increased capital dollars to transit when it feels like we're in a really big service crisis, right? A shiny new BRT line sounds great, but we've lost 20% of our service in the last 4 years of the pandemic, and that feels like the real crisis that's in front of us. And so for the past year, we've been organizing for a big state expanded transit funding solution that would serve all of our counties through a legislative process. And it became clear really this fall that nobody was going to save us, that the Senate Republicans were too intransigent to allow something to pass. And in fact, they had an incentive for the major agencies to fail, in particular, have a lot of disdain for SEPTA, and so weren't going to come up with a funding solution. And so we turned to the idea of state highway funding flex when it became clear that it was actually a possibility for addressing an operating funding gap rather than just a capital funding need. We've realized that there was an example from 2005 in which our former governor, Ed Rendell, had used that as a strategy, not only to save the system here in Pittsburgh area, Pittsburgh Regional Transit, but also SEPTA from falling off a funding cliff where there were service cuts and fare hikes that were being threatened. That it had been done. And then, in fact, as far as I know, I haven't heard of many or any other examples of this mechanism being used to save transit agencies from falling off fiscal cliffs, like as an emergency measure for operations. So it was really exciting to realize that there was an example of this in our own state, where a governor had acted on his own, really, to make this happen without having to move through the legislature. And that became our galvanizing organizing effort over the last month. And so we put together a fact sheet about it, pulling from a lot of great information. And this that you're sharing, we also stumbled across Transit Center and Urban Institute's fact sheet about how SEPTA in particular could be funded through this state highway flex maneuver, which Yona had just published last year. And it was great timing for that because we knew that SEPTA was about to fall off its fiscal cliff and that riders beginning January 1st were about to face serious fare increases and service cuts if we didn't have some kind of stopgap measure, at least until we could get the legislature to meet again and come up with a long-term dedicated funding solution. So in this process over the last month, in fact, over the last couple of weeks, we've gotten over 3,500 emails sent to the governor's office and did a bunch of 2,500 peer-to-peer calls educating people around other riders around this opportunity to pressure the governor, who is more responsive to us than the legislature is at this point, to flex money to keep SEPTA from falling off his fiscal cliff. And I think, so yeah, as you heard, we won today $153 million that is going to be flexed for SEPTA to ensure that they have operating funding to keep them solvent until July. One of the things that I find really exciting about this moment and this opportunity is that even though here in the Pittsburgh region, we're not seeing funding through this mechanism, it's also a really effective political tactic to compel some of the Republican and rural legislators to the table for a broader funding solution. So we know that we're looking at another big legislative fight in the spring, but they've been trying to sit this out, and they don't want this to continue happening where money is being pulled from highways to fund transit. And so I think have a vested interest in actually negotiating, and also brings the road builders and such to the table as well. I guess I think that might be all I have to say, but really are excited to think about and identify other places around the country that are in maybe more purple or red states where you have a blue governor that can act unilaterally, but use it as a political mechanism to try to find some other funding solutions. And obviously, we would love to see this be a tactic that's not just used in this emergency situation, but something that we can bake in as to have a more equitable allocation of federal funding that comes to our state towards highway uses and transit. So if I'm going to share with you some materials that we have, but thank you all for letting us report out this victory.
No, thank you so much, Laura. Thank you to everybody who's been asking questions in the chat. Before I turn things over to Corrigan, I just wanted to really hammer home the message that Laura was sharing in response to one of those questions in the chat. It's not that a lot of these federal dollars can be used directly for transit operations. It is that as this diagram from the Urban Institute shows, by spending federal dollars on transit capital projects that would usually be funded by state dollars, all of a sudden more of those state dollars can go to transit operating. And in this case, it was used in an emergency situation, but it need not be used like that in an emergency situation. Governor Shapiro could tomorrow, if he really wanted to, decide that he's going to take money away from some more highway projects and not only help SEPTA survive until a legislative fix can be achieved, but can help SEPTA, can help Pittsburgh's transit system, can help transit systems across Pennsylvania thrive and have operational stability for years if he really wanted to. And other governors could take that path as well. And I see we have a hand raised. We're going to try to keep this train chugging along the tracks. So if you have a question, feel free to ask it in the chat. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Corrigan from Transportation for America.
Thanks, Giancarlo, and thanks everybody at Green New Deal Network for bringing me on. I'm going to talk a little bit about our research of Transportation for America on the climate impact of the infrastructure law, and really why it's so important that we get those funds transferred from federal highway programs to transit and walkable projects and that sort of thing. So, and this report is called Feeling the Crisis. It's on T for America's website right there. But just going into it. So I think we all kind of remember vaguely when the infrastructure law first passed, we had a lot of great positive news about how it would be a climate solution according to the Biden administration. But unfortunately, when you look at how that money was going to be allocated, especially when you look at how states have used that fund, those formula funds historically, we were handing them off to organizations that tend to spend these dollars in a way that's terrible for the climate, and they don't exactly act transparently about it. So we did some research to get to dig down and see how states are actually spending these dollars and how much is being spent on capacity in the new infrastructure law, and connect that to emissions. So when we took a look at federal highway formula funds programs right now, it's actually really bad. There is over $36 billion spent on highway expansion and road widening, those sort of projects that increase emissions so far, just in these first few years of the infrastructure law alone. Meanwhile, we're undercharging or shortchanging maintenance and absolutely underfunding passenger rail and other projects like that. So, and this is kind of to be expected when we've got two of the largest programs in the infrastructure law, the National Highway Performance Program and Surface Transportation Block Grant that Giancarlo had kind of explained a little bit more about. 83% of all highway expansion projects, those are those that increase emissions, have been coming out of these two programs already. And that's $31 billion that could have been allocated to either maintenance of existing roads or transit spent on highway expansion, producing 64 million tons of CO2 through 2040 right now. And that's about equivalent to removing the impact of about 16,000 wind turbines, all running for a year. So that's why it's really crucial that we keep this kind of pressure up and ensuring that what Governor Shapiro did today kind of becomes standard moving towards more climate-friendly projects. So, for instance, this map here actually shows, based on how states are spending the infrastructure law, where the emissions are going to be coming from based on how they're building new highways. And everywhere is basically building new highways. There are a lot of governors across the country in blue and red states and purple states that could be held accountable and pressured on these things. We've got data in our report down to the state level and also to the county level, if you want to do activism at the MPO level, detailing how what kind of projects are being funded. And we also have information about how what exact types of projects those are. Oops. One sec, we'll advance that. All right, sorry. Hope everything's still good. Yeah, and right here we've got the information about per capita and more. So you can use that information in your advocacy. And it's extremely important to get those dollars out of programs like the National Highway Performance Program and the National Highway Freight Program because they are some of the biggest emitting programs of all federal funded programs when you consider that for every $1 million invested in the National Highway Performance Program, we've seen 672 tons of CO2 emissions added over baseline levels. And that's absolutely terrible for the climate when we have the largest programs being some of the most emitting. And if states continue to spend at this rate through the entire IIJA, that could produce up to nearly 190 million tons of new CO2 emissions, which is about the same as running 50 coal-fired power plants for a whole entire year. So that should just really underscore the importance of why we need to take these funds that could be going to highway expansion and reorienting it to transit, sidewalks, bike lanes, and even electrification. So with 50%, as Giancarlo said, is transferable across programs, there's also increased flexibility that he had mentioned from from federal highway to FTA. So there's a lot of money on the table. You need to work with electeds and also transportation officials. And for the remaining 2 years of the infrastructure law, there's about $110 billion in federal highway formula funding across all 50 states. So transferring those funds could avoid the worst fates for the climate, specifically those 50 coal-fired power plants figure. If just a good amount of this funding could be diverted away from highway expansion to transit, all of that could be avoided. So I'm going to pass that back to Giancarlo.
Thank you, Corrigan. And thank you all for the activity in the chat. Seeing a lot of justified scrutiny for spending choices that have been made in states like Washington, California, and I could list a few more personally with governors who love to tout their climate bona fides, but are always ready to pound some pavement instead of, and yes, Kathy Hochul as well. But governors who are always ready to pound some pavement instead of riding the rails. And at this point, I'm going to hand it back to our campaigns director here at the Green New Deal Network, Saul Levin.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I just want to say, Laura, thank you for your leadership. I mean, y'all giving everyone across the country a significant climate and transit win in this moment is such a boon for the entire movement for people to see like what we can do. So just deep gratitude for y'all's organizing and hustle, and really excited to be in community and keep working together. And Corrigan, I think there's so much interest in your map and stuff in the chat that you might need to drop it in because everyone wants to keep learning from you. That was exquisite. So thank you. Good to see you. Um, y'all, let's go to the next slide. What are we gonna do about this? Okay. I think a lot of people just highlighted this in the chat. There's a lot of Democratic governors who aren't doing a damn thing on this. And they're talking about how they're a climate champion, they're from a blue state, they have a whole story about blah, blah, blah. I don't think any of us want to hear that until they're actually moving money towards transit that's actually serving low income folks and Black and brown and indigenous communities and the care workers who actually benefit primarily from funding public transit. It's ridiculous. But in a moment when Donald Trump and the Republican Party are taking over in Washington, how inspiring is it to see that there's $110 billion, a huge percentage of which could actually be moved towards funding buses, trains, bike lanes, repairing roads so people are actually safe, improving crosswalk infrastructure. There's so many things we could do that are actually about people. Um, and no matter where you're from, I'm from Michigan, Governor Whitmer. If you're from Illinois, Governor J.B. Pritzker. If you're from California, Governor Gavin Newsom. Any of these people could not only do what Josh Shapiro just did with pressure from Laura and the Transit Workers Union and other folks in that community, they could do it times two or three or four with hundreds of millions of dollars actually funding climate friendly transportation. So I really, I really want to stress that this is not a Pennsylvania only story. They're leading out front, the organizers. I think Laura mentioned in the chat, Connor from Transit Forward Philadelphia. There's an absolute amazing coalition in the state of Pennsylvania, but there are coalitions like that in other states. While red states are moving money from transit to highways, blue states are moving money from transit to highways or not doing anything at all. That's not how we're going to solve climate change. And frankly, it's an international disgrace. And that's why we're getting together here today. So I want to highlight our strategy and what matters here. Not only was there tremendous organizing on the ground in Pennsylvania, we are aware and have confirmed that people in the federal government who work in transportation were pushing on Shapiro's team to come closer to meeting the demands of activists. Okay. We don't know all the details, but they were in touch. Okay. So the federal government can push for these climate wins. So what we're doing here today is we're highlighting the fact that communities are pushing and leading the way on this fight, but also the federal government has a role. Biden and the agencies, transportation and otherwise, can actually still secure climate wins. And every day until the proto-fascist government of Donald Trump comes into office counts for getting climate wins. So thank you to our speakers. And this is our strategy, okay? We're going to push DOT to pressure governors to flex funds. They should be sending out guidance of here's the type of sidewalks and crosswalks and bus lines that you could be building. And they should be saying, you should be doing that because we need to stay on track to meet the Paris Agreement and beyond. And we're not going to do that with Donald Trump in the White House unless states lead. So if you're wondering, why is there not a single governor in the United States who's doing as much as they possibly can on climate? Let's not wonder anymore. Let's make them do it by giving them pressure from the White House and the DOT, and at the state level, pressuring the governors to actually do more. So we're really excited to have y'all as part of this campaign. We're so excited that you're here. We're going to jump directly into some tactics about what we can do. And today, we were actually going to be helping with the final push on Governor Shapiro. And it literally happened today. So if you're like, could this actually work? Y'all, it happened today. Ask Laura, ask Connor from Pennsylvania. People are literally moving, $153 million during this 24-hour period. So if you're like, damn, could we actually do something on climate? This is the moment. Get involved in the campaign. We're going to be pushing every single day that we can. to try and secure these wins. And the next state that we're going to focus on the federal government today, Pete Buttigieg, et cetera. The next state we're going to focus on is Illinois. As many folks know, the L in Illinois, the metro system is crumbling. It's in terrible shape. It's never looked so bad in many years. And it doesn't really make sense. It's like y'all's population shrunk significantly, so you have to serve less riders. There's not actually a good excuse. But if you didn't know until today, now you know. JB Pritzker could move hundreds of millions of dollars from different parts of money he literally already has in the bank account. Well, probably in his personal bank account too, but also in the bank account of the state of Illinois. He could literally move the money and do it. So we're going to leave you with this before we jump into the action part of this call. If your governor says they don't have money for transit, they are lying. They're lying to your face. They're lying to communities. They're lying to climate organizers. They have the money, or they don't know that they can do it. They're either lying or they don't know, because every state has some money to improve transit right now. And so what we're encouraging everyone to do is say, hey, did you guys know about this? That's the first step. And if they say, no, we didn't know about that, you can tell them, you can share the fact sheet we put in the chat. Or if they say, yeah, we knew about that, but we're not doing it, then you already caught them and you know that they're moving Republican talking points in the era of Donald Trump. So I'm going to pass it back to Giancarlo to take us into the action portion of our call. And thank you again to the speakers for your amazing organizing and sharing.
Thanks all. So today, our coworker Nassim has already dropped a link in the chat to our toolkit for this organizing. There is a link in that toolkit, as well as I think Nassim is about to drop this in the chat again, a link to our action kit that we are using today to call USDOT. We have a script in that action kit, which is once again linked in our toolkit and will once again be put in the chat shortly by Nassim. But we are going to be calling DOT at the number that is on the toolkit, as well as the numbers on this screen. One of those numbers, or one of these numbers on the screen, may be the same as the one in our toolkit. I can't remember right now because I've been talking a lot over these last 30 minutes, but we will figure it out. And if the number that you're calling is the main DOT number, which is 202-366 4000, you're going to want to hit 6 because it's going to leave you it's going to give you a lot of options, and 6 will take you to a person who you can actually talk to. Let's try to keep calling to the second number down to a minimum, but the link to our action kit is now in the chat. So we're all going to mute for a couple minutes so that we can call USDOT and let them know that we want them to pressure Democratic governors to flex this funding. And we'll be back to continue talking and continue the presentation in a couple minutes.
Giancarlo, if I can add one thing in here, y'all, if like this is going to be awesome. If you call and the number doesn't pick up, that's okay. Leave a voicemail. We're trying to see how many calls we record, because we're going to be able to reinforce with DOT staff that this happened today. And so we're trying to push this through, but then we're going to tell them like, yo, literally dozens of people called you guys. What are you doing? And we're also going to reinforce that information with the Congressional Progressive Caucus and the White House directly. So we're going to, like, your call is going to have a multiplying impact as you're putting it in. So if you can just drop in the chat, like, I just left the voicemail, or like, I'm talking to someone right now, so folks know that we're getting through and we can share information. We'll probably do this for the next 5 to 10 minutes. And folks can stay on camera if you want, so that you can see people having funny conversations with DOT staff or leaving voicemails. Does anyone have any questions before we start?
And if anybody is having flashbacks to phone banking during the pandemic, I'm right there with you. So we're all in solidarity on this, you know.
Yeah, Catherine, I see a hand.
Sorry, what phone number are we supposed to be calling?
So I would call the top phone number there.
Sorry, I don't see any phone numbers on this. I don't actually. I know I see. Ask me editor for toolkit. Tell Buttigieg Biden to flex funds from. I don't know what happened to it. Let me try clicking it again.
Yeah, and the number is in the chat
Numbers.
here as well, if
I
that's
see a blue graphic, and then I see email language. I see social media. I see a call script. I'm
yeah,
not.
so the script is there in that toolkit, but if you there should be a button in that toolkit as well that says action tool, make a phone call to Pete Buttigieg's office today.
Yeah, I see that.
So if you click on that, that'll take you to the script.
Well, I don't have a problem with the script. I don't see what phone number I'm supposed to be calling. I don't see it in here.
So once you click on that, after you sorry, one sec. After you submit the information, there's like a little form that asks you for your name and zip code. After you submit that, the script will show up on the right side and there's a number at the bottom. But we also have the number
Oh,
on
here it
this.
is, hiding in the bottom there.
Yeah, yeah. It's a
Okay.
shy number, you know.
Okay. Thank you for hiding it so beautifully.
Of course.
All right, y'all, we're gonna come back in 1 minute. So if you're on a call, feel free to wrap up. Um, and we will reconvene to close out for the day in a minute. Okay, cool. I think people are wrapping up calls. I think Daniela was supposed to give our closing here, but she's on the phone, so I will jump in um, and try and help us close here. If we can go to the next slide. We're going to jump into next steps. So we made calls to Secretary Pete's office. Here's our next steps. We're going to send out a draft email people can use in a follow-up. So if you attended this meeting, you'll get it. We're going to put out social media. We were not expecting to fill up the mailbox this fast. So we can do more. Yo, like honestly, if everyone on here made multiple calls and voicemails, that's over 100 messages. So we probably filled it up pretty quickly. So well done. We're going to be reaching out to the secretary's office to be like, this is full. Um, yeah, so we'll send info on an email draft if folks can send an email. It is now 5 p.m. EST. That's right. Um, and our next target is going to be JB Pritzker in Illinois. So we're going to send out some materials if folks want to target them. And then I'm going to pass it to Daniela now that she's off the phone with Secretary Pete's office to share about how folks can get involved in the Everyday Counts campaign.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for calling. Okay, so we are making this is just the beginning. We're going to continue calling and emailing, like Saul said, with the Everyday Counts campaign. One of the easiest ways to get involved outside of calling and emailing is to join the Everyday Counts Signal chat. Signal is an app that you can download on your phone or on your computer. And there are groups of hundreds of us who are all trying to get Biden to do the most he can on climate before he leaves office. I believe Nassim can drop that in the chat here. If not, I can go ahead and drop it as well. Give me one moment.
We just dropped it in.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, yeah, this is a great way to get involved. We will continue to have more meetings. Our next meeting is going to be Tuesday at 5 p.m. and it's going to be about designating monuments. So if you can make that, all the information will be sent to this group. Please download. We would love for you to continue joining. I'm going to pass it back to Giancarlo.
Thank you, Daniela. Just as a last bit of information, we will be following up with y'all with the recording for this call, as well as some of the resources that we talked about during the call, so that y'all can use it in your own advocacy and in your own conversations with other people in your life who might ask, why does the bus show up so infrequently? Or why is my train always delayed? And now you can give them an action to take. But before we fully signed off, I wanted to thank our co-hosts today, including the National Campaign for Transit Justice, which does incredible organizing in support of federal operations support for transit agencies across the country. The Labor Network for Sustainability, which covers a whole bunch of topics, but includes transit equity. I'd like to thank specifically Bakari Heights, the transit equity organizer who is on this call in the audience with y'all. And last but not least, the Climate and Community Institute, which has some research coming out. They always have research coming out, but some additional stuff coming out soon, hopefully, that I think will add even more rich stuff to this conversation. And where Yona Freemark from the Urban Institute is also a fellow. So thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon in our action to make every day count. And we hope that you have a great weekend, no matter what the weather is where you are. So thank you to y'all and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.